"Productivity isn't cool," he said, without looking up from his phone. His thumb kept flicking across the screen, pausing only when some brightly lit image on his feed caught his attention. I sat across from him in the conference room I'd practically lived in for half my life, my palms flat on the polished table. The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp and absurd, but somehow final. My name is Thomas Keene. I'm 55 years old, and for the last 25 years, I was the operations director at Hawthorne Logistics, the company that built its reputation on never missing a deadline. Trucks, planes, warehouses. If it moved goods across the country, I had my hands on it. In 25 years, I never let a single delivery arrive late. Not one. And here I was, being told by the founder's grandson that I was finished, because efficiency wasn't fashionable enough for the brand he wanted to build. He leaned back in his chair, sneakers propped on the edge of the table his grandfather had once pounded with his fist when a contract was at stake. His eyes stayed glued to the glowing rectangle in his hand. "We need visionaries, not clock punchers," he added, as if that explained why a man who bled for this company was being shoved out the door. I wanted to laugh, or shout, or slam my fist through the expensive glass wall of the conference room, so every single board member outside would see what was happening in here. But I didn't. Years of discipline kept me steady. My jaw tightened, my breath came slow, and my face stayed calm. I reached down, almost casually, and slid my hard drive from the docking station beneath the table. A small click, nothing more. He didn't notice, too busy smirking at something on his screen. That drive held every report, every routing algorithm, every efficiency model I'd built since 1998. 25 years of knowledge distilled into one black piece of plastic, no bigger than a wallet. Without it, the gears of Hawthorne Logistics would start grinding against themselves within weeks. "You'll get your severance," he said, finally glancing up at me. His expression was rehearsed indifference, the kind of look you only perfect after years of never having to earn anything yourself. "Don't make this weird. My grandfather liked you, but times change. Times change." I remembered the day his grandfather, Richard Hawthorne, shook my hand in the loading bay when I was just a foreman with ideas no one else wanted to hear. Richard had said, "If you can deliver results, I'll give you a shot." And I had. For a quarter-century, I'd kept his promise alive. Now his grandson was throwing me away, with a flick of the wrist. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the drive in my pocket. I smoothed my tie, adjusted my jacket. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice level. "Wouldn't want to make this weird." He gave me a dismissive wave, already halfway back into his digital world. I turned toward the door, my shoes silent on the carpet. For a moment I caught my reflection in the glass wall. Tall, graying hair at the temples, lines carved deep from long nights and early mornings. A man who had built his life on precision, now being discarded for a buzzword. Outside the conference room, the office hummed with normalcy. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, shipping schedules flickered across giant monitors. People glanced up at me as I walked past, confusion in their eyes. Everyone knew who I was. Everyone knew what I'd done for this company. But no one said a word. At the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside. As the floor numbers ticked down, I let myself smile for the first time that morning. He thought he'd fired me. What he didn't realize was that I'd just walked out with the one thing Hawthorne Logistics couldn't function without. The game wasn't over. It hadn't even started. 2 weeks later, I sat in the back of the boardroom I once commanded, like a general on the front lines. I wasn't at the table anymore, not in any official sense, but an old ally on the board, had slipped me in to observe. Observe was the word he used, though everyone in that room knew exactly why I was there. Hawthorne Logistics, the company I'd given a lifetime to, was starting to collapse under the weight of its new leadership. And it was happening fast. The first signs were in the numbers. I'd always said that numbers don't lie. Only the people who read them do. Shipments that once moved like clockwork now arrived hours late, then days late. Clients who used to trust us like family started sending angry letters, then legal threats. Our name, once synonymous with reliability, was being dragged through the mud on industry forums and news tickers. For 25 years, we were the gold standard. In 2 weeks, under one man's arrogance, that standard was nothing but ash. At the head of the table sat Connor Hawthorne, the owner's grandson, the man who had fired me with a smirk and a shrug. He was red in the face now, jabbing his finger at a row of executives who had once depended on my models and schedules to make their jobs simple. "This isn't my fault," he barked, eyes darting from one nervous face to the next. "You're the ones who should have caught these mistakes. Operations is a team effort, and some of you clearly aren't pulling your weight." It was almost comical. These were the same people he'd praised for their vision when he first strutted into power. Now, when the empire was crumbling, they were his scapegoats. The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, their faith in the boy king draining by the minute. I could see it in their eyes. Doubt. One of the older directors, a man named Sullivan who had been with Richard Hawthorne nearly as long as I had, finally spoke. His voice cut through the chaos. "Connor, we've never had issues like this. Not once in decades. What exactly has changed?" Connor stiffened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked from water. He blustered something about modernizing, about needing to move away from old-fashioned processes. It was the same jargon he'd thrown at me when he pushed me out. Productivity isn't cool. I could almost hear the echo of those words in the silence that followed his excuses. I sat there, calm, hands folded in my lap, watching the panic ripple around the table. Every nerve in my body wanted to stand up and shout that this was inevitable, that I had warned them without ever saying a word. But I didn't. I kept my face neutral, my eyes steady. Let him sweat. Let them doubt. The longer the silence stretched, the deeper the cracks in his armor grew. Reports piled onto the table, one after another, each one worse than the last. A pharmaceutical client threatening breach of contract. A national retailer rerouting business to competitors. A trucking union filing grievances over chaotic schedules and unsafe demands. It was a landslide, and Connor was standing at the bottom, trying to stop it with his bare hands. He pointed at charts and spoke in circles, trying to drown the facts in empty language. But the facts had teeth. They tore at him with every missed delivery, every angry letter, every dollar lost. I leaned back, breathing slow, enjoying the spectacle in the way a soldier might watch a battle unfold from the safety of high ground. They wanted someone to blame. Soon, they'd see who was truly at fault. But not yet. Timing is everything, and revenge, like logistics, thrives on precision. I had something more powerful than their missed deliveries. Something hidden. A truth buried deep in the records I carried out with me that day. They thought late shipments were the worst of their problems. They hadn't seen the real rot yet, and when I chose to show them, there would be no coming back. The hard drive sat on my desk like a weapon, small and unassuming, but sharp enough to cut through the heart of an empire. 25 years of my life lived inside that plastic shell. Routes, contracts, optimization models, efficiency records, every proof of why Hawthorne Logistics had been untouchable for so long. But it also carried more than my work. Buried in its files were copies of things Connor Hawthorne never thought anyone else would see. Inflated invoices, ghost vendors, personal expenses buried in operational budgets. He believed his digital trail was clean. He was wrong. Every night since my firing, I'd sat in the quiet of my small home office, the lamp burning over stacks of printouts and spreadsheets I'd pulled from the drive. I wasn't just reliving my career. I was dissecting his arrogance, line by line. The picture grew clearer with every file I opened. While I had been perfecting delivery routes and negotiating with drivers to shave hours off schedules, Connor had been siphoning money to cover his lifestyle. Luxury condos in Scottsdale, club memberships, late-night transfers to shell accounts. He thought his charm would blind the board, thought his last name was a shield. But I had the numbers, and numbers don't lie. I didn't rush. Revenge that comes too fast rarely sticks. I started with old clients I trusted, men and women who'd seen me fight for their contracts, who knew I never promised anything I couldn't deliver. A casual call here, an offhand email there, nothing direct. Just a reminder that Hawthorne Logistics was not the company it used to be, that some of the people running it didn't understand the value of loyalty. I let them connect the dots themselves when their shipments failed, when invoices suddenly didn't match agreed-upon terms. They asked questions. I stayed vague. A seed doesn't need to be forced into the ground. You just let it fall and wait for it to take root. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with a few allies still on the inside, men like Sullivan, who'd been around long enough to see patterns, who had always respected my obsession with precision. I never gave them more than hints, but I made sure those hints were enough. Check the billing from March, I'd say, or ask yourself why trucks are routed through Phoenix instead of Albuquerque. They were smart. They could see the waste, the irregularities. The grandson's shield was cracking, and I was the one tapping at the weak spots. But at night, when the house grew too quiet and the glow of my lamp was the only light left, the questions returned. Richard Hawthorne had given me my chance all those years ago. He was a hard man, but he believed in merit. He built the company with sweat and stubbornness, and I respected him for it. Was destroying his grandson's reputation the same as spitting on the old man's grave? Or was it honoring his legacy by protecting the company from a fraud, wearing his name like armor? I told myself Richard would have hated what Connor had become. Still, the doubt pressed in like humidity, thick and heavy. I stared at that drive some nights, fingers resting on it like a trigger. I could obliterate Connor with a single upload, but something in me held back. Timing mattered. I wanted him to feel the ground give way beneath him, to sense the walls closing in before the final collapse. I wanted him to know what it felt like to lose everything he never earned. The plan crystallized slowly, piece by piece. Clients restless, allies suspicious, board members impatient. All it needed was the spark, and I held the match. One evening, I slid the drive into my pocket and stood from my desk. The house was silent, but my mind thrummed like machinery coming online. I grabbed my keys and stepped into the night, the cool air brushing against my face. When I pulled into the Hawthorne Logistics lot, the building loomed against the sky, its glass windows reflecting the streetlights like watchful eyes. I walked across the pavement with steady strides, the hard drive warm in my pocket. Tonight, I wasn't coming back to remember the past. I was bringing the storm with me. The boardroom was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. The air hummed with tension, The kind of low buzz that sets your teeth on edge before anyone even speaks. I hadn't expected to be here again. Not after Connor shoved me out 2 weeks before. But Sullivan had called me the night before with a simple sentence. "We need you tomorrow." That was all. Now I sat at the far end of the table, silent, while the grandson of Richard Hawthorne paraded at the head like he was giving a TED Talk. "Look," Connor said, grinning as if the room weren't full of men and women furious about millions in losses. "The numbers are a temporary dip, nothing more. Growing pains. Every company that reinvents itself faces them." He tapped a chart on the wall screen, a graph that somehow managed to turn catastrophic decline into a gentle slope. It's about branding, about vision. My grandfather built a machine. I'm building a lifestyle. The words dripped with arrogance. Around the table, jaws tightened. A few board members exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. They were waiting. Connor mistook that silence for respect. He kept talking, each sentence more detached from reality. Late deliveries? Clients pulling contracts? That's noise. You can't disrupt an industry without a little turbulence. The old guard doesn't get it. They think logistics is about timetables and trucks. It's not. It's about image. That was when Sullivan cleared his throat. His voice, steady and deliberate, sliced through the nonsense. "Connor, image doesn't explain why our on-time rate dropped from 99% to 71% in a single month. It doesn't explain the lawsuits or the clients walking out the door. What exactly is your plan?" Connor smirked. "My plan is working. We're moving away from obsession with meaningless metrics. We don't need bean counters obsessing over deliveries. We need bold thinkers. We don't need men like Keene anymore." His eyes flicked toward me, and he let the insult hang. A few chuckles escaped his allies, but most of the room stayed stone-faced. I leaned forward just slightly, my hands resting on the folder I'd brought with me. "If I may," I said. The chairman nodded immediately. He'd been waiting for me. Connor rolled his eyes but sat back in his chair, throwing his arm across the backrest, like he was at a bar. I opened the folder and slid out the first set of documents, neat stacks of charts and summaries. "These are your delivery reports," I said, my voice calm, measured. "Late shipments have increased 350% since my departure. That's not turbulence. That's collapse." Murmurs rose around the table as they scanned the pages. Connor waved his hand dismissively. "Cherry-picked data. Keene's just bitter. He thinks the company can't survive without him." I didn't flinch. I laid out the next set. Client cancellations, contracts voided, penalties stacking like bricks. 22 major accounts terminated, losses totaling $48 million in projected revenue. These aren't cherry-picked numbers. These are signed letters. The room darkened with realization. Connor leaned forward, sneering. "You think you're clever, don't you? Digging up old numbers, making yourself look like the hero. You're not. You're obsolete." His laugh was hollow, forced. "These people don't need a relic lecturing them. They need leadership that looks forward." He expected me to rise to it, to argue, to lose my composure. Instead, I folded my hands, waiting. Every arrogant word he spoke dug his hole deeper, and I wasn't about to stop him. The chairman finally leaned in. His voice was heavy with finality. "Mr. Keene, these losses are severe. We need to know if there is more, if there is something we haven't been told." I let the silence stretch, every eye on me, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. Then, slowly, I reached into my folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it across the polished wood toward the chairman. My hand lingered for just a second before I let go. "This," I said quietly, is the part no one has seen yet. And I didn't open it. The envelope sat on the table like a live grenade. No one moved, no one spoke. Even Connor, who had spent the last hour dismissing facts with a smirk, stared at it with a flicker of unease. I reached forward, broke the seal, and spread the papers across the polished wood for everyone to see. Pages of numbers, signatures, account transfers. Every sin, he thought, buried under corporate noise. This is the truth, I said. My voice was steady, even. While you were distracted with branding and lifestyle, while the company bled contracts and deliveries, Connor was siphoning money from operating budgets. Here. I pointed to a column of figures. $300,000 billed to a vendor that doesn't exist. Here. I tapped another page. A wire transfer to a personal account in Scottsdale. And here. I slid out photographs I'd printed, grainy but undeniable. The condo he purchased with that money, under a shell company with no employees, no product, no service. Just an address and a name. The room erupted. Chairs scraped back, voices rose, and papers shuffled as hands grabbed for proof. The silence of the last weeks cracked wide open into chaos. Connor shot to his feet, face flushed, veins bulging in his neck. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "Old man Keene is bitter because I let him go. He doctored this. He's lying to you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. 25 years I spent here. Not once did I miss a deadline. Not once did I cook a number. Every file you're looking at is backed by timestamps, bank records, invoices signed by Connor himself. Lies don't stand when the numbers are this clean. The chairman's hand shook slightly as he turned a page, his eyes narrowing. Around him, board members whispered in angry bursts. One of them snapped, "If this is true, you've been bleeding us dry while telling us deliveries didn't matter." Connor's bravado wavered. He tried laughing, a hollow, desperate sound. "Come on, you can't take his word over mine. I'm a Hawthorne. This company is mine." I leaned forward, my words deliberate, each one falling like the click of a hammer being drawn back. "No, Connor. This company was your grandfather's. You only inherited the name. You never earned the trust that came with it. And now, the trust is gone." He turned toward me, his eyes wild. "You think you can destroy me? I'll ruin you, Keene. But his threats dissolved under the weight of the evidence spreading across the table. The chairman slammed a palm against the wood, silencing the room. "Enough. We've seen what we need to see. Connor Hawthorne, you are hereby removed from your position, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and law enforcement will be contacted." The color drained from Connor's face. He sputtered, grasping for words that wouldn't come, then tried to bolt for the door. Security intercepted him, broad men in dark suits, their hands firm on his arms as he thrashed. He looked smaller suddenly, stripped of his arrogance, just another man caught with his hand in the till. I gathered my folder with slow precision, slid the remaining papers inside, and stood. The board barely looked at me. They were too busy shouting about damage control, legal teams, and police reports. My part was finished. I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't an observer. I was the executioner, and the sentence had been carried out. That night, I sat alone on my back porch, the desert air cooling against my skin. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a storm. I poured myself a drink and let the glass rest against my knee, staring out at the dark horizon. Connor's downfall wasn't just his own doing. It was part of a cycle older than him, older than me. Betrayal has been with us since the first contract was signed, since the first promise was broken. and revenge. Revenge is older still. In families, in marriages, in businesses, the pattern repeats. Someone takes more than they've earned, and someone else restores the balance. I hadn't set out to destroy him, but once the truth revealed itself, destruction was the only outcome left. I took a slow sip, the liquor burning warm in my chest. For 25 years, I delivered shipments across the country without a single delay. Tonight, I'd delivered justice with the same precision. Some endings don't leave room for sequel or doubt. They land once, heavy and final, like a gavel striking wood.